Welcome to section 5, part 6. In this episode, we are going to be creating our entities from data assets. So we left off the previous part where we just finished loading all our data and we were handing off to the player controller to create our groups, and we're passing over our loaded group assets. So let's kick off in the player controller, and we'll start by adding a few variables that we're going to need. Obviously, we're creating player groups, so we're going to need a player group. We want to store references to those player groups once they're created. That's the actual actors. So we'll need a variable for that. We're going to use an onRep for that. And the reason why I'm putting an onRep in that is because when the group is replicated, we want it to go to the client and we can create the UI for the group. And we're going to do the same for the entities themselves. Keep a list of entities, and we'll do an onRep for those as well. And that'll just be actor array. Oh, we already created that, didn't we? Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm going to bring it down here now anyway, and we'll replicate using an onRep. That's those. And we're going to create some private variables here. So we'll create some, this is just be for, we're going to need spawn locations for the group and the entities. So I'm just going to create an array of vectors. Replicate those, will be used on the server. And now we can go on to the functions we're going to need. These will be vectored. So we're going to need to, we just created those spawn locations, so we're going to need to generate group and entity spawn locations. And we'll need to pass through the asset. So it'll be assets. And we'll need the same for the entity assets, entity locations, sorry. And we're going to pass the group assets, but we're also going to pass the group reference. And we're going to need an index as to what group we're up to. Sorry. All right, before we get too much stuff here, let's start with the generating the groups. So we'll first off, we'll empty that array that we created just to make sure there's nothing left in there from something else. Now we're going to have to, we may have to add some data to our group data for spacing. So I might just, so this is just going to be a temporary, so we can lay out for now I just want to lay them out in a grid. So we're going to space them out along the x-axis. So they'll be side by side. Sorry, one after the other in a line. Yeah, we could do some sort of grid layout later, I think. We're going to have an array of floats, and it's going to be the current. So the first one will be on the player spawn location, and then we're going to alternate from above that location to below that location, above the previous top location to below the previous bottom location, if that makes sense. We'll end up with all our groups on the x-axis, but like spread out left and right. Let me explain it a bit better. So this will be the player spawn, and then the first group will be here, second group will be here, third group or fourth group, sorry, will be here, fifth, and so on. And then when we go to do the entities, so they're the group locations when we go to do the entities. So the first group will be here, second group, however many there is, get the idea, and then that's how they'll be laid out. So we just want to initialize this to just a size of 2 with just 0 in it for now. Now we need to start calculating each group's location. I'm going to use for loop change I to so we want to check first of all that the asset is valid. Sorry, not I. Sorry, force habit. We're going to need a asset manager reference because we're going to access the group data. This should be able to be const because I think we're just going to be reading off it. We're going to cast to our group data on the asset we're currently up to, and that will include the group data asset.h. And we'll use the asset manager to get that. Right, now we're going to need another function here because we're going to have to calculate how much space this group requires in the x-axis. Yeah, I have and we're actually going to pass through the members of the group because they're what we're going to have to check for the spacing. And we'll pass through our vector 2D as a reference to set the spacing. So we'll create that vector 2D. And we'll just initialize it with length vector. And then to pass through the entity assets, we can get that from the group data because that's just the members. So that's the array of assets that make up the group. I'll just pass out. I think it actually. I'm going to calculate both the x and, because that's why I did the 2D, I'm going to calculate the x and y value. So later, if we do want to do some sort of grid setup warning, you'll know that we'll already have the y spacing. So we're going to need a reference to the asset manager here because we're going to be checking the entity data. I'm going to copy this as well and we'll just change it to the entity data. And we'll need to include our data asset.h, and then this will be group entity data assets, and the index we'll need to put in a for loop. So yeah. I'll just be on. I might just force initialize the spacing. So dot y back to 0. So whatever spacing you put in here would be the minimum. I might make 500 and 500. So that'll be the minimum spacing. So if the spacing in the data asset is less, then it'll just stay at 500. And then we just need to check both of those. So if our entity data, do we add default space? And that's oh yeah, default space. So if the spacing is greater than the current spacing we have, our area spacing, we'll do y first. Then we want to update it. It means this entity needs more than our default. So we'll update it with this. Basically what we're doing is we're finding the entity that requires the most spacing, and we're going to use that for the spacing of the group. And I'm just going to copy this and send it over to x and x. These will equal our max spacing that we need for the, and we can make this a const. I don't want to make it. Okay, so we come back to our groups are in. Oh, we're doing our spacing, aren't we? So we're here. So now our area spacing is updated. I might just put a comment in. going to do here is we're just going to, because the first group is not going to use any spacing data, just going to use the player's start location. So for our group spacing, we just want to add that. We should already have that player start location we added in a previous part. Now what we're going to do with our current spacing, so this array we initialized up here, this is going to keep track of the spacing requirements at the current index. So what we're going to do, so we've placed the first one and we now want to space off this group the 50% of the spacing they require. And then, so let me do another picture. I know you guys love my art. What we're going to do is the first one will spawn, and then we're basically going to update the current, what do we call it? The current group spacing on the X. We're going to update this to 50%. So 50 here, 50 here, and that'll give us the group spacing. So then when we place the next group, it'll be here, and then we'll have the 50% spacing there for this group, and that'll be its spacing, and you get the idea. So because we've placed the first group, although it hasn't used any of the spacing, we need to tell the next group where to start its spacings. So let's do some comment. I'm just gonna check that this is valid. It should be valid, right? We just initialized it. Safety, I'm just gonna say is a valid index, and this will be 0. So there's two indexes in there because one's up and one's down. So we'll call 0 up. So we can safely access that directly because we know it's valid. And then we're just going to times it by 0.5. And then we're going to rinse repeat that for the down. We'll invert the area spacing value. And the reason why I'm doing plus equals is because later on we'll be, I'll close my diagram, but we'll be continually moving away, so we want to maintain the current distance. We don't want to do the rest of the code. If that was, if we're up to the first one, we just want to continue to the next one now. So now we want to, what comment again? So we need to determine if we're going up or down, and we just use the index for that. I'm going to call it iterator, just a mod of the index. So that's either going to be 0 or 1, designate up or down, and that is our, oops, sorry, I made a mistake there. So that's 1 on the array, so this will tell us if we're going up or down by this being 0 or 1. And we just want to make sure that's a straight integer, so we're going to convert that to an integer. And then again, we're just going to check that the index is valid. So we'll grab this. And now we don't need to do it twice like this one because it'll always be the up-to-date index. So grab this and change this to the offset index. And then we just want to check which way we're going, so we can do both these calculations in the one line here. So if it's equal to 0, then we want to go to the positive, and if it's not, we want to go to the negative. And then we actually need to calculate the actual location based off that offset. So we've updated the offset, and we want a location from it. So before we had the player's location. Now after we apply the offset, that's our location. So that'll be the additional 50% to get to the second location that I drew in the diagram. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new location from the player location. Sorry, the player start location. So that's just making a copy of that variable. And then I'm going to offset the X using our offset value. And then I'm just going to add that to our group spawn locations. And then like we did up here, after we've assigned the location, we want to add the 50%. So we're essentially just going to do this again. So that'll add the rest of the spacing for the next group. And that should go through each of our groups and determine their start location. So then we need to, we're actually going to generate the entity location at the point where we spawn the entities. That's where we'll get this group spawn index from, and we'll already have the group actor. I might come back and do that when we get to that point. So let's go back to create groups and start on that. We're going to start with, we're going to be spawning an actor, so we're going to need some spawn params. I'm going to need a world reference to spawn anything. Check that that's good. And then we can start spawning our group first of all. And we don't need a particular reference. Our group actor, we can just spawn a generic one. It's going to be another benefit of using data assets to spawn stuff. You generally don't need a unique actor. They're just general things. Characters are a bit different because they've got meshes and animations. It gets a bit more complex, but just general objects. This group actor, it's easy. You don't really care where it spawns. So that transform is just a blank transform, so it's going to spawn at 0, 0, 0, 0 rotation and 1 scale. And we'll pass in our spawn param. And then if that has spawned successfully, we will enter this. We want to add it to our player groups. And then we want to begin creating our... There's a function we need to create as well. We'll just do... We have to pass some stuff to that, but we'll just do the onRep because otherwise I'll forget it. This is on the server, so you need to call onRep. We may not even need that to onRep on the server, but I'll do it for now. It can't hurt. But if we're going to create, if it's only going to be used to create UI and stuff, we won't need it. But now in this create groups, we're going to need to pass some things. We're going to need to pass the... Sorry, I've just realized I'm actually creating one group here and I'm in the create groups function. Hang on. I'm going to come back here and I'm going to create another function called void create group. And that's going to take const primary asset ID as a reference, and that'll be just a single asset. And it's going to take the index that we're up to in our player group assets. So this lines up to the the group locations we just created. I'm just going to create that function, and I'm going to move all this down to here. Sorry about that. We'll come back. Actually, let's create this function while we're creating function. So to create the entities, we're going to pass the same. We're going to pass the group asset reference. We're going to pass the index the same. And then we're going to pass the actual group reference. Like so. So we'll come back to that. Let's do this. I just skipped over. So in here, this is where we need to call the generate group locations that we just created. So let's comment. And we're just going to kick off spawning for each group asset, checking that it's valid. And that's when we'll go to our create group. And we'll pass the asset and the index. And so we don't forget, this is, once this loop completes, all our spawning's finished. So here we can call that, recall in the previous part, we added a on player entity loaded delegate to tell the loadout manager when we're finished loading that we need to broadcast that with our player controllers. It knows this player that is finished. So now we can create group, and we want to pass. So now we can pass our group asset, the group spawn index, and the group itself to the create group entities function. And then again, come back up to, sorry, where did we do it? I'm going to grab this asset manager reference. And also the group. We need to read the group data to get a list of entities, just like we did here. I got the one asset now. And then we want to loop over all the entities in this group and start spawning them. So we haven't done the entity spawn location, so we're going to have to do that before this loop in here. I'll just switch this over so it's the same as the other one, same order, that's all. Same order as this one is what I meant. It'll just be a single asset. So let's do that now. Clear the entity. So we're going to reuse this for each group. So we need to empty it. And we're going to do the same as before. We're going to have that a T-array float for the two axes up and down. Or this will be left and right actually. Then we're going to need the group spawn location. So that's going to be our start location for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, we're just going to put like a backup here. If it can't find the group spawn locations, like something's gone wrong, we'll just default it to the player start location. So if that's not a valid location, sorry, if it is a valid location, and we want to use that index, and then if it's not, we're going to default it to the player start. So that's basically our X position. Down here. Oh, and 2 question marks. Now we'll need our asset manager. And we want to just loop through all the members of this group now. We'll call I member index. Yeah, right, sorry, I've done a mistake here. I don't want this to be the asset. I want this to actually be the group data asset, so it's the casted version. Need a for declaration here for that, and this will be, I'm going to call it group data. Sorry about that. And then where we're calling this, here. We need to change it to this. It's the same thing, it's just casted to our type or to the object. And that saves us, doing the cast again here. And we can access all the variables straight up. So we want to check that that member is valid. Not continue on. Right, now we need to get the data for each entity. So for the first member, we want to assign them to the center position, so the group start location. I might change this up, so I want a better way of doing this rather than how I did it here. Save a bit of code, so let's here. Oh, actually, one thing we need to do when we're spawning entities, we need to factor in the terrain. So we made tools for this, didn't we? So we've got the, did we have the, it was, I was in the core player controller. Got the utilities here, so get terrain position. That. So then we need to just pass this. Yeah, that will update position to actual terrain position at that location. And then I'm just going to copy that into here. But instead of the start location, it's going to be an entity location. Can all be entity locations, can't they? I think this is what change needs to be. And then if we actually make this here, so we're setting entity location to the start group spawn location each time. And then we don't need to do this first one here because then it'll just pass through the start location and we can project it down the bottom there. So what we can do is change this to if it's not equal to the first one. So we're going to skip the spacing calculation. We notice here we're not using 50%, we're just using the full spacing. So just get rid of this. So when it's not the first one, we do the spacing. That's a bit neater. Super keen, you can go back and change the other one for the groups. It'll need to be slightly different for that 2% spacing thing, but anyway, that is our group. That's our entity location sorted now. Can't be const because we're going to change it down here. Oh no, it is const because we're not changing it. We're changing entity location is a copy. So if we come back to our create group entities now, this is a not valid, so this will be a continue here. We just want to break out. Skip this one if it's not valid or it doesn't have a location for some reason. Okay, we stuffed up our function there. This part's starting to get a bit long, so I'm going to leave it there. In the next part, get into spawning the anti-actors. Thanks for watching.